Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. This is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin from FIDIC. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this particular webinar session, which is going to be a good conversation. The topic is really about developing commitment to quality in construction projects. This is a session that has been delivered by our Risk, Liability and Quality Committee. And I'm really delighted to sort of welcome everybody wherever you are. I hope you are keeping safe. Since we started the webinar over a year ago, I think we've had 26 webinars, and we have over 20,000 that actually registered for it. 11,500 participated so far from over 150 countries around the world. And I do believe that in addition to those who participated live, we've had over 19,000 that went on our YouTube. So I'm really delighted that people are able to join. But it may be interesting to pause for a minute before we dive into the session and just look at some of the key messages. I think the message that we hear from all those who participated is there is a new normal, a new working practice, and things will never be the same. That the economic impact of COVID is going to cost us close to 1 to 2 trillion, and this is going to be worldwide. The staff and the issue about well-being of people is going to be critical. There will be implication for contract issues, projects and postponement. Communication is absolutely essential among all parties. Part of what we're doing now as FIDIC is to communicate to our stakeholders and members and also support them all over the world. Investments in projects and infrastructure will probably face different challenges because people have to reprioritize. And infrastructure investment in the short term to medium term will change. But more important is the issue about collaboration and working together to make sure we deliver the end goal. And the other point which really come up is that it doesn't matter who you are, what size you are, which part of the world, no company, big or small, is immune from the issue of technology. That's why we're here today. So I'm really pleased that as we started this year, rather than just doing pure COVID, we are doing 3-in-1. One is an opportunity for us to showcase our committees, and today our committee responsible for risk and liability and quality are presenting their paper. We also cover what I call the state of the world. We've done 2 so far. We've been very successful, one on infrastructure and the other one on water, and there's another one coming along. And we continue to deal with what happened and the impact of COVID as we go along. So in a way, there's a real opportunity for us to debate. Without spending too much time, it is my delight to invite our president, Bill Howard, once again, who continues to surprise me, notwithstanding the time zone different and everything, to join all the 26 webinars. Bill, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nelson, and I'll be very brief. I'd like to personally thank you and the Secretariat for putting on these webinars. We've put on a whole bunch of them over the last year or so, and while the pandemic has been a terrible experience for all of us, one of the benefits that FIDIC has received from the pandemic is these webinars that we put on. As Nelson indicated, we've reached out to over 20,000 people around the entire world, which is fantastic. So in that sense, we've built quite a network during these very, very challenging times, and that's very good. I'd also like to thank the speakers today for joining us on a project of critical importance to the engineering, construction, infrastructure community, and that's related to quality. It also is one of our 3 pillars in FIDIC, is and very, very important to us. So something that we want to emphasize. When I started my presidency, I committed the 2 years to a few things. A couple that I just quickly mention is to seriously improve our communication with all our stakeholders, and I think we've done that. But one of the tools that we wanted to use in improving our communication was to revamp our committees, make them much more diverse from all standpoints of diversity, and make sure their terms of reference were synchronized with each other, and we've done just that. And what you're going to hear today is somewhat of a result of our efforts to develop terms of reference for committees. And in this particular one, we'll be hearing from Nicola, who's the chair of our Risk, Liability and Quality Committee, very, very important to us, who will be introducing our speakers and basically running the program. So a huge thanks to Nicola for agreeing to chair this committee. I know everyone involved, including you, Nicola, are very, very busy, and we appreciate the time that you put in. And I also appreciate, once again, the time that our speakers have put in to participate in this very important webinar. So back to you, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Bill, for that kind introduction. Just to bring you up to speed, I'm told we have close to 1,000 people register from so many countries. On top of the list is Kenya, followed by United States, India, Pakistan, United Arab Emirates, UK, Philippines, and the list goes on. Just to try and echo Bill's comment, today's topic is really one of our key pillars, is quality, is related. And I'm really delighted to have Nicola Grayson from Australia, who is the chair of Consult Australia, in leading us in this particular session. Nicola, I'm not going to spend too much time than to hand over to you. The floor is yours. Nicola, thank you.
Thank you, Nelson, and thank you, Bill. And hello, everybody. We're delighted to join you this evening for this webinar. And I'm going to give you a little introduction quickly, first of all, to the Risk, Liability and Quality Committee, which I'm honoured to chair. It's a working group of the board, FIDIC board, and our primary functions are to support the consulting engineering industry to navigate risk and liability for reporting, guidance and education, relevant training, to engage with and maintain relationships with the various risk and liability stakeholders, not limited to global and regional insurance organisations, procurement, legal and financial bodies, monitor and report professional liability conditions and insurance worldwide, identify issues to which FIDIC should contribute original work or can coordinate and present existing global knowledge, and finally advise the FIDIC board and the Secretariat on all aspects of risk, liability and quality across our industry. I have great pleasure today to introduce the panel of speakers who will be talking to you and talking through the subjects we're covering off today. So after I finish my opening remarks, you'll hear from Walter Painski of Painski Consulting, who's going to talk about the body of knowledge for quality and risk, followed by Malcolm Hyde, our Executive Director, Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters from the UK, who's going to talk about claims and disputations in our industry. We then have Michael Erb, Senior Vice President and Executive Director on Commercial Risk Solutions and Professional Services from Aon. And he's going to be, of course, talking about global insurance, professional indemnity insurance market impacts. And then we have Martin Holberg from IUB Engineering, Vice Chair of the Committee on Risk Mitigation Strategies and Quality Management. And then Laura Fung, Associate Director, Legal Group from Arup, and also Vice Chair. And she's going to be talking about risk mitigation strategies and liability management. And then we'll come on to a Q&A with all of you. So please do put your questions in the chat function, and we will answer as a committee as many of them as we possibly can get through. Now, I think what you're seeing on the screen right now is the poll. So to start us off, we're going to start off with a bit of a poll tonight, today, like you say, this evening, because it's this evening here in Sydney. And so you've got that on the screen now for you. So what are the top 2 most common reasons for contacting your professional indemnity insurer in relation to a claim? So we'd like you to select the top 2 that apply to you. So do you think you're contacting your PI insurer mainly because of design error, disagreement over project scope, project delay, lack of contractor supervision, or do you feel, frankly, it's an unjustified claim by a client being made against your organisation? So if you could submit your poll, that would be your answers, that would be marvellous. Thank you. Okay, all right, I'm seeing some results here. So we've got the most popular, 53% are saying the reasons they get a claim for their professional indemnity insurance is design errors. That's 53%. The next one then was project delay at 43%. Then we have unjustified claim by a client at 37%, and agreement over the project scope of 33%, and lack of contractor supervision is the last one at 12%. So thank you very much for participating in that. So without further ado now, I'd like to hand over to Walter, who's going to be our first speaker now. So Walter, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for this introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to speak here as Vice Chair of this very busy circle. And I would like to give you an impression of the quality management system with focus on the ISO 9001 in consulting engineering organizations. And what comes up next in the future on this topic? It means future steps in the standard development. The construction sector is generally not a coherent entity, and the causes of its fragmentation are deeply rooted. Fragmentation, which takes the form of an individual participant pursuing singular interests in a project, has a substantial hindering effect in the quality of the construction engineering industry. It's called in the literature the external factor. The overall quality of service provided by engineering consultants is a function of the quality of engineering design output, the procedures and the timeliness in the service provided, and the quality of the manner shown to the customers. In engineering services, customers are highly concerned with the way that they are treated during service delivery. But this is nothing new, because already in the 90s, Tony Jensen from Denmark published in the journal Structural Engineering International that the education, experience, knowledge, competence, motivation, etc., of each employee is the basis for engineering consultancies. Put in a nutshell, for an engineering consultancy, the employees are the lifeblood. In addition, the ability of the company to attach the right people to the right project is vital. If we search in literature, the implementation of a quality management seems to be a benefit for the whole industry, since legal issues, including professional indemnity, which is typically a major risk for engineering consultants, increased. Early publications in this issue started with the historical quality awareness campaign, which was launched by the Hong Kong government in the 90s. There were too many incidents and design flaws in the field. So that's why the government required a quality management system for industry professionals, and the ISO 9001 management system had to be implemented. At least they could increase the commitment of the staff, which lead internal to an improvement in quality of the organization and an external reduction of the incidents. Other empirical studies show in the publication the benefits of such management systems as follows. Just to give you an example in descending order of priority. Improved processes and procedures, employees become more quality aware, improved service quality, organization image and the marking improved, increased customer satisfaction, and so on. We should point out that a lot recommended improvement measures on, for example, the areas of service quality, efficiency, productivity, site safety, environmental sustainability are related to the quality management principles. It seems there is a high degree of agreement that the adoption of long-term training in quality management and engineering skills should be adopted to achieve engineering design excellence. It is important to establish realistic design durations for achieving quality improvement, and that engineering consultants should maintain a balanced focus on design output clarity, project buildability, and design cost effectiveness. The results above are just to give you a touch of some findings in peer-reviewed studies in the management literature, which partly focus on the consulting engineering industry. In this context, I want to specify that there is, among many other ISO standards in engineering service context, another recognizable ISO standard revised in November 17. It's the ISO 10006 Quality Management System Guidelines for Quality Management in Projects. Just to list some clauses in the standard, for example, cost estimation and budget, risk assessment and risk treatment, resource management in projects, change management, and so on. But let me come back to the mainly used, and by the way, also best branded and distributed standard. It's the ISO 9001. Maybe you're familiar with the FIDIC paper from 17. guide to the interpretation and application of the ISO 9001 version 2015 standard for the consulting engineering industry. I was the chair of this working group myself. This guide seeks to assist firms in the consulting engineering industry in choosing and determining how best to apply the ISO standard to the existing management system. It's a fact that every 7 years, more or less, a new version of this international standard comes up. It means next year in 22, the next version could be published. But before this will happen, there are some procedures and services necessary which are done on the market. There are TCs, technical committees in the ISO organization, which will determine if there are sufficient drivers to indicate a need for change to ISO 9001. Also, many associations launched a series of surveys and debates in the issue, and we are trying to collect as much information feedback as possible, so to better support future contributions. Some of its members consider that ISO 9001 should not be revised at this stage, mostly due to considering it is too soon for revision. Some reasons for such decision can be further detailed. Most organizations migrated recently to the new standard in 2018, and the need to strengthen the application of the requirements is noticed, as there are considerable changes in the latest edition. Lessons learned from the implementation of the current edition are still being collected for identification of the effectiveness, difficulties, concerns, and opportunities for improvement that shall play a relevant input for any future revision. And many certified organizations express the perception that a new revision and transition will require significant effort in addition to the current challenging business scenario. Not to talk about COVID-19 as the biggest challenge now, and may need to reconsider maintaining certification. From my experience and my point of view regarding next steps could be in that way, there is a partial revision of the content necessary for the following topics: knowledge management and competence. It means how can we save know-how in our engineering organizations? Then the role of top management, risks and opportunity. That means risk assessment and risk treatment. Evaluation of the satisfaction of relevant interested parties. It means all stakeholders on a project, including the investor, government, clients, contractors, suppliers, consultants, and operators, have a responsibility for ensuring quality. Control and traceability of external provided process and traceability of services. No major revision makes sense, as ISO 9001 is halfway implemented and minor adjustments are okay. That means improve clarity and to give a better value to users. In context to our topic, that could mean if we can convince the project insurance side of the positive effects of a certified quality management system, that means less mistake in the design process or other incidents, traceable risk considerations in project, and so on, which could mean decreasing insurance premiums for engineering companies. These results of improvement in organizations are traceable in scientific publications. Anyway, this will lead to a discussion on the path forward. So, would the final decision to confirm the 9001 at this time, or to establish the project at the preliminary stage to examine if an early revision of the 9001 should be started. This decision will be made next month in May and in the ISO committees. After this date, we know if we should rework in 22 the FIDIC guideline regarding to 9001 or not. Thank you for your attention, and let me hand over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Walter. And I'd now like to invite Malcolm to talk to us about claims and disputation in the industry. Malcolm, welcome.
Thank you very much, Nicola. That's very kind of you. And a big welcome from a very cold United Kingdom today. So I'm Malcolm Hyde. I'm the Executive Director of the Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters in London, but I'm also the Honorary Secretary of FIDIC, which is the European Federation of Loss Adjusting Experts. And I just want to talk a little bit about, following on from what Walter was saying about some of the insurance issues, and I'll talk a little bit about underwriting, and then I'll go into talk a little bit more about some of the claims experiences. So as a loss adjuster, we investigate claims, and we want to understand the root cause of any loss for two reasons, really, substantially. One is the loss covered by the policy, and secondly, is there a recovery possible from a third party? Walter touched on how we can mitigate insurance premiums and reduce premiums. I want to just mention premiums. They've gone up recently, and there's several reasons for this, but some of those are pressures such as experience. So poor claims experience would always result in higher premiums. That's as sure as night follows day. Insurers don't like to insure risks that they don't fully understand. So the more information you can give them about the risk and the more expert view you've got about it, the better they'll understand the risk and the more likelihood they are of insuring it. There are, of course, notable experiences such as the Grenfell Tower experience in London, which have given rise to considerable concern within the insurance community and therefore higher premiums. And also you have to look at some of the way the contracts are funded, and that gives the opportunity sometimes where there's a wealth of money to go into one contract, where insurers may be able to cherry pick almost the risks they would choose to or prefer to insure. So that's some of the background around premiums and costs of insurance. But we also talked about expertise, and Walter highlighted this considerably. What are the experts, and are experts needed? I was once listening to a talk by somebody who said that, you know, XYZ has got lots of experience, wasn't qualified, and you didn't need qualifications. The question that came to my mind straight away was, if you went to a dentist and they weren't qualified, would you allow that dentist to take your tooth out? I think the answer is probably no. I think for me, expertise and qualifications are highly important. So I want to look at some of the issues around this. So contractual issues might arise, giving some issues around claims. So for example, the contract might say that the subcontractor is responsible for the excess or the deductible. And let's just say that deductible in the contract is specified at, say, $1 million. But the contract actually of insurance has set a deductible of $5 million. There's a huge gap there. So clearly that's going to cause a big problem. But I talked about some of the more technical issues around engineering, and I would like to highlight some of the experiences that my members gave to me. So there was one example where a huge water tank had been installed. A central pillar was required to support the tank, and some webbing or straps, steel straps, were meant to be put into place. Unfortunately, when the stress testing was undertaken, it wasn't possible to do it in situ. No one had understood fully the consequences of the design because the expertise hadn't been used properly. This meant that when they carried out the stress test, they actually put the heaviest person they could find from the contractors to jump up and down on the webbing, the steel webbing, to see how much it flexed. That was not an adequate test, and lo and behold, the thing failed. So the failure to use proper expertise resulted in a massive claim. We sometimes experience electrical arcing due to cost cutting, and this might be as a result of a design where someone has specified his design, but for some reason someone's decided to cut down the cost and use cheaper implements to carry out the actual work. Now we have an expression in the UK where you would say you spoilt the ship for a halfpenny of tar. In other words, we've saved a very small amount of money on a component, but that component was so fundamental that actually that gives rise to a large claim. So that saving is without doubt a short-term saving at a very high long-term cost. We often see claims where after sales or after the installation, there's a failure to understand the full checks that should be carried out to ensure the premises or the engineering facility is adequate and safe. If you don't use experts at that point and qualified experts, minor defects might go undetected, or where minor defects are seen, it might be felt that they are so minor that they're ignored because you haven't got expertise recognizing the importance of those minor defects. A proper qualified consultant will understand what the defect is and what the importance of that is, and how rectifying it will prevent further problems in the future. Also, we see lots of claims arising from lack of pre-loss surveys. Where a pre-loss survey can be undertaken by expert engineers in conjunction with the broker, again, full understanding of the risk can be obtained, but also at that stage, the engineer is able to highlight aspects of the risk that could be mitigated, aspects of the risk where you could actually make amends to actually prevent losses, and of course, you could identify areas where in the course of works, you could change things and adapt things and modify them so that claims don't arise in the first place. So in other words, we can highlight issues that may result in a claim and avoid them in their entirety. Or where claims do arise, because we've got pre-loss understanding, we can actually mitigate the effects of those failures. So brokers who employ or engage specialist firms of engineers and experts may be able to find out far more information about the risk, therefore going to insurers, and with that full information, they will be able to secure better premiums because they can go to more insurers and get more opportunity to float the risk at much better rates. They can also highlight precautions that can be taken to mitigate the effects of any losses or indeed prevent losses. We also find that losses result from the age of equipment. And again, this might not be a catastrophic failure because the whole set of equipment has failed, but a minor defect which is not understood. So again, this is a situation where a minor defect is ignored because a proper expert hasn't understood the risk that this is actually then presenting. So a catastrophic failure results from what appears on the face of it to be a minor failure. Walter also highlighted the standards, and these are really important. If they're not followed, and we often find that the standards aren't followed, then there's a claim that results from that. So not only do we have to have those standards, but those standards have to be adhered to and correctly signed off by an expert to demonstrate that they have indeed been adhered to. So in conclusion, I would highlight we should build as specified. We should use the installation as it was intended. We should carry out regular and thorough inspections, and we should take the appropriate action upon inspection. Those are the four highlighted issues that I would like to leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Fantastic. If only that were the case every time. Next up, we have now Michael, who's going to talk to us in more detail about what's going on with the global PI insurance market. Over to you, please, Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Nicola, and thank you very much indeed, Malcolm. Malcolm mentioned that claims are one of the main factors affecting professional indemnity premiums, and he is correct from an individual point of view or firm point of view, but I think what we have to consider is that there are a number of other factors that are generating the current market conditions, As Nicola mentioned earlier, we do produce a document once a year about the global professional indemnity market, and the factors that are affecting this are indeed the experience underwriters are having in professional indemnity for construction risks, but it's professional indemnity generally. It is hurricanes, it is other natural disasters, it's cyber risks, and all of these are coming together in almost a perfect storm situation, which has created the current market conditions. Last week, Lloyd's reported that their rate increases they got across all lines of business for 2020 was some 10.8%. And that would say, oh, that's really good news. Unfortunately, a lot of the syndicates are still in a negative situation, and that has been made far worse when you start looking at the new reserves that are being put in for COVID-related risks. So I'm afraid to say that the hard market or the firm market is going to be with us for a little while. We may talk later about how long that may be, but that's just some more of the background. So what does this mean on a global basis? Well, obviously, firms go out each year to buy their insurance, but a lot of firms actually rely upon project insurance rather than just their corporate insurance, or they rely on a combination between both project and corporate insurance. Project insurance currently is very expensive, very difficult to find. We are having a large proportion of projects being required for extensions, and because they are long projects in any event, those extensions are not being allowed. So therefore, what recourse is there for the construction professionals? Because they're required to have project insurance, perhaps under contract, but it's not available. For that very reason, I think we need to think about some guidance needs to be put into contracts to say that where insurance is not available and what is not available, what does that mean? What are the alternatives that have to be put into place? That is one problem. I also want to pick up a point that Malcolm made about a pre-loss risk assessment, for want of a better word. Thank you, Malcolm. Now, on corporate insurance, where you're insuring the whole basket of your risks, it's probably very difficult to do this. But I can see a situation where, for project insurance, that this may well be mandated by insurers going forwards to understand the risks. If we look at some of the reasons for so many claims, design error is there, and quality, the whole purpose of this webinar today, is around quality. It's absolutely of paramount importance. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not just quality, it is perhaps late delay of drawings rather than the quality of the drawings. Also, perhaps that the design hasn't been developed fully enough by the time the contractor makes a bid. These are two of the very, very highest instances of claims we are seeing in the market today. Also, contract administration. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of contract administration, of recording all the changes that go on during a contract to actually be able to defend yourselves in the event there is a claim. And then we talk about standards, the point that Walter mentioned earlier. Standards are essential because that is what you're going to be judged against. And therefore, you have to look very carefully at contracts. What are your standards you're working to? What is your duty of care? Because that's what you will be judged against when the claim comes in. And all these subjects, I'm sure, are going to be covered in other ways by other people. But I just want to say that all insurance draws all these things together. And then when you come to a situation where the contractor is the provenance of design build insurance across the world, means the contractor is more often your client rather than the end user. and the contractor has their own agenda. They want to try and make money on the project. So you usually find that the consulting professional is put in to a potential claim situation for the contractor to ensure that he makes money on that project if he can. So I think that's the actual summary. I'm actually going to give someone back some time. Hopefully I'll get some bonus points to other people and try to keep answering any questions that come back later in the course of this webinar. Back to you, Nicola.
Oh, well done, Michael. Yes, bonus points to you for a very succinct presentation. Thank you. Okay, so Martin, we're now going to hand over to you, Martin Holberg, who's going to be talking about one aspect of risk management strategy. So we're now moving into, we've heard all of the issues and what you might face in the industry. Now let's talk about how we resolve some of those and what are the risk mitigation strategies. And of course, quality management is one of the most fundamental. So welcome, Martin, over to you.
Hi, you out there. Greetings from Switzerland. Perhaps also small personal words. From my background, I'm a structural engineer, 30 years in the Swiss consultancy, and mostly active geotechnics, tunneling, and hydropower. But I had a second job for 25 years now. I did internal audits, external audits, and for 25 years I have been working for an ISO certification body in part-time. And that led me through about 2,500 audit days altogether, from gravel pits to design offices to road authorities, and at the end to the Swiss Federal Railways. So I spoke to a lot of stakeholders in the construction chain, and my background is not only engineering, that's the primary one, but also listening to other stakeholders in projects. Let me first reiterate perhaps what is risk, what's uncertainty. You heard from first speaker, from Walter, that risk is not only negative. You have upside risk, which is positive and called opportunity, and you have downside risk, which the insurer is talking about, which is negative and called a threat. But actually, it's neutral. And when you heard about risk appetite, perhaps in the context of banking, taking risks is really entrepreneurship. So we are venturing, taking on new orders. And also we as consultants would like to make some money on it. And when we venture new contracts, then we try to keep the collateral threats in check, which is a hedging of threats in order to pursue opportunities. What is the difference between uncertainty and risk? David Hilton once said, risk is an uncertainty that matters. There are many uncertainties in our profession, but risks are those which matters in reaching certain objectives. Actually, we always try to strike the optimum between costs and benefits, but really time before construction and during construction really it's not always sufficient to clear every uncertainty. So we're doing eventually a cost-benefit analysis with uncertainty. And this includes innovation, as we heard about the Grenfell Tower. So we try, on the one hand, to optimize the project for the client's benefit, while at the other hand, trying to minimize drawbacks to other stakeholders. Mind also that risk is not a stationary thing. Risk creep, like you know about scope creep, is non-stationary. That may concern the likelihood, because structures deteriorate during exploitation. Also, we think about climate change, about water rises, about heavy storms and this kind of thing. And also consequences changes with time. This is perhaps because the value at risk increases, and also the preparedness has been lacking. We may also talk about fading memory. People may not remind that they had similar problems before. They may not remember, I mean. We have to calculate human error, and we even have to find sometimes ignorance. or lack of qualification of players in the project. Or that has been termed the VUCA world. Perhaps you have heard about this from project management people. VUCA is the acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So if I may now ask Barbara perhaps to show a simple slide, or I think it's a risk breakdown to explain what is residual risk actually. So can you see it? Yes. So the hazards is at the top is a potential danger, and some of those hazards are principally known, others aren't. Some are then realized that they matter in a project and are taken into account. But this is already narrowing down which hazards you take into account. And only those you have taken into account, you can devise countermeasures against them. So if we come to the next one, please, Barbara. These are the countermeasures. And some are appropriate, some are inappropriate, some are effective, some are ineffective. And some are taken as residual risk. So the orange arrow shows which are really, which safety is gained owing to countermeasures. And at the left-hand side, you have accepted risk. And at the right-hand side, you have hazards due to human error. So the residual risk, which is the left column in gray and the right column in gray. Barbara, next one, please. So the dotted line in lila, violet, you have this accepted risk. And you have not really accepted risk, but blurry, you don't realize that you are at risk, which is the human error side on the right-hand side. And then of those residual risks, if you're lucky, some risks do not materialize. Barbara? This is what we call luck. So when we don't suffer a loss, sometimes it's not because our countermeasures were so effective, but because we simply had some luck on our side. And then the last one, Barbara, perhaps, or the second but last, only those risks which you decide that in risk mitigation strategy you leave it to insurance, only the left part matters to insurance, and all the rest to the right side has to be dealt with by quality management. Of course, quality management cannot cover all human errors. You don't find all human errors, even not during audits or peer review. So it does not really cover all of them. So thank you. That's for that slide. Perhaps we can come back to that discussion later on. What is actually tolerated risk, what is accepted risk, and what is just ignorance. Now coming to quality management. Usually when you talk about quality, as we heard before about the quality of drawings, we think of the product of our work as consultants, as designers, which is the design project. But also our image depends on the built infrastructure object in the final sense. And this is influenced by the contractor. So we call that the dual product, which is the design outcome and which is the built object. Then Walter has spoken about ISO 9000, and ISO 9000 since the year 2000 says you arrive at a good quality product by mastering the processes which lead to this product. And the process has to be as good as possible, no matter what your consultancy fee, your engineering fee is, because it is not about effectiveness, it is about efficiency. And these processes are our process as consultant, also called project management, really, and design management. And then there are processes involved which concern the owner or the operator of the facility, and that is facility management and maintenance. So if we want to have return on experience, also on experience how good our design is, we need collaboration in the construction chain. to also to know about problems during construction and knowing about problems during use. And this return of experience should then be put into a risk repository, which is all the scenarios what can go wrong and what errors already occurred or what errors luckily did not occur yet, but they are a threat to us. Project quality. So, and in contrast to the organization, the parent organization, and their quality management system, project quality concerns project alignment. Sometimes you also hear the word project charter. And that means, first of all, you have stakeholder involvement. You have to come to terms with different conflicting goals of the stakeholders, which need to be mediated, coached, brought to a solution. And of course, then you must also be aware of hidden agenda. Not all stakeholders really tell you your proper motivation, their proper motivation. And what we also need to consider in the project quality is the whole life of the structure of the facility we're building. So we need a whole of life perspective, and not only to what concerns our own contract. Project alignment also requires process alignment in the value-adding chain of construction. So we are well advised if we have an early involvement of contractors, operators, and users of the facility, we should make sure that the processes of everybody in that chain, in that they interlink, that we have a handshake at process interfaces. And we need a transverse quality assurance. For instance, if we make design assumptions in geotechnics, for example, bearing capacity of ground and this kind of stuff, these design assumptions need to be verified during construction. So the designer must be also on site and not be told by night, stay off, I manage that all by my own contractor, by my own construction management. Then perhaps we can discuss in the question and answer session about digitalization. I strongly believe that digitalization will work as a driving force for process alignment. And then perhaps some last words about project quality management. You probably know the project management triangle. And the triangle is about the scope of the project, and is the sum of the functionality or the functions of the project, the deadline, and the budget. So quality really concerns all the processes to keep deadlines, to stay in budget, and to assure the functionality desired by the client. As you saw in this breakdown of risks, of uncertainties and risks, you saw that quality management has two objectives. One is to carry through, to assure the risk mitigation strategy, that all risks where you have defined countermeasures, that these countermeasures are being followed. And the second one is the detection of human error and of negligence. The problem is that, as often stressed also by our President, William Howard, that we are working in a fragmented industry. And I think we should talk about the dividing line between engineering and construction supervision. And we should also talk how we as consultants can become more involved in billability or constructability questions, that's one thing, but also in maintainability. And at commissioning, decommissioning, and all those processes, which actually are in the hand of our clients and of the owners and the users. So I hope I could manage to set the scene a little bit so that you come up with some clever questions, and we hope we are able to answer that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. And that's a great reminder. We have got some questions coming through, but please keep thinking of them and saying them through. We have one more speaker before we get to our Q&A session, so please add them in now. So it's my great pleasure to welcome now Nora, who's going to take the approach to risk mitigation by looking and discussing liability management. So Nora, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. So today's webinar is about the importance of a commitment to quality on construction projects. This commitment requires a team effort, and as we've all heard from our earlier speakers, it spans various aspects, including sustainability, climate change, health and safety design, and insurance. And part of what quality also encompasses is the implementation of best practice, best business practice. So this last session, I'm the one standing between yourselves and the Q&A session, but this last session is about how we can use the contractual framework in order to achieve this. And as probably one of the few lawyers on this webinar, you will not be surprised to hear that my talk is about how best business practice is about managing risk from a liability perspective through your contracts. So going back to first principles, what do we mean by liability? Well, in essence, it is the state of being legally responsible for something. And how do we become legally responsible? Well, in practice, it arises where one party breaches an obligation to another. And those obligations can arise in a number of ways, but for the purpose of today's session, we're simply looking at how one attracts liability through the contracts. Now, contracts are key, and we should always have one prior to commencing services. Otherwise, there's just no clarity as to what is expected of you, nor what is expected from your client. A professional services contract contains a vast number of provisions, but in my view, the key clauses are those relating to scope, i.e., what is a consulting engineer required to do, and to what standards will the consulting engineer be measured against in the provision of those services. Secondly, payment. How is the payment to be calculated? How are additional and/or varied services to be dealt with? And finally, liability. What would the consulting engineer's exposure be if things do not go as planned? Things can go wrong, and in the event that they do, then the contract would be your starting point in understanding liability. What were the consulting engineers or the client's obligations, and have they failed to fulfill that obligation? So that's the first thing. Secondly, how do you then become liable under a contract? And there are a variety of possible reasons for this. For instance, we might have signed up to absolute obligations which we can't meet. We might, of course, delay, Michael mentioned this earlier, delay to the project and face a claim for liquidated damages if we have agreed to them and we have a contractor client, or other delay-related costs. Or we might have been negligent in the performance of our services. There is a fourth one to this, and maybe we're not really at fault at all, but the client is simply attracted by our deep pockets and by our professional indemnity insurance. It happens. Deep pockets and large PI insurance can be attractive to claim against, particularly where the other parties are smaller, or they have lower PI limits, or they might have disappeared altogether, which is also unfortunately quite common. And finally, if the consulting engineer is found to be liable, well, how much are they liable for? In the case of damages for breach of contract, which is what we're talking about here, the normal rule is that the client is entitled to recover all losses which flow naturally and foreseeably from the breach, i.e. direct losses. They could also recover special damages which might have been drawn to the consultant's attention as a likely consequence of any breach at the time the contract was signed, consequential damages, consequential losses. But the main point I'd like to draw here is that the client's rights of recovery for breach of contract are pretty wide, and they cover all losses which flow naturally from the breach, unless there are specific limitations or exclusions in your contract. So it's really vital to implement good business practice when it comes to your contracts. What does good business practice look like in terms of contractual risk management? For me, the first thing is to have a contract in place. Have a signed contract before you commence your services. Make sure that the contract has been reviewed, that it's workable, and that it contains appropriate limitations. Be really careful where you are presented with the client's bespoke forms. Try to propose and use industry standard forms such as the FIDIC contracts wherever possible. And the reason for this simply is that bespoke forms which are proposed by the client tends to allocate risks and liabilities disproportionately on the consulting engineer, whereas standard industry forms tend to do this in a more even-handed manner. The contract sets out both your rights and your obligations and your liabilities. So it's really vital that you read and you understand your contract. Don't just keep it in the drawer once you've signed it. It is a document that should be referred to throughout the life cycle of your project. Secondly, make sure that your contract does contain clear and reasonable liability provisions. Make sure you understand the liability arrangements in your contracts. Don't sign up to standards which put you at risk of strict liability or fitness for purpose. It'll be far easier to be in breach of contract, even if you have exercised reasonable skill and care, if you've signed up to strict liabilities. Make sure that your PI limit is proportionate to your scope and your fees, and that there is a clear limitation of liability provisions. Make sure that your scope is clearly defined. Be really careful of scope creep, and be careful about volunteering to do something outside your scope. I know it's quite easy to fall into it, but be really, really careful about that. And the reason it's really important to have that clarity of scope, because unless you know what the scope is, how do we know when we're being asked to carry out additional varied services? So, and if you are asked to carry out additional varied services, get written agreement as to what this is, and don't start work without written instructions or written confirmation if you've been verbally instructed to do so. Be really careful and be really alert as to inadvertent assumptions of liability. And then finally, and this is just touching on all the points which have been made by the previous speakers, implement good project management. Keep accurate records and archives. Take care with written communication. Keep a record of everything. Having said that, be really careful how you frame the written word. Don't respond in haste or anger. If things deteriorate and a formal dispute process is implemented, the subsequent disclosure process can throw up lots of colorful language and description, which might not always be helpful. Make sure that the jobs are properly resourced and that due care and attention are given to your deliverables and the standards by which you are to perform to. And this talks to the points which have been made by Walter and Malcolm with regards to expertise. Make sure that your team is alert as to all the issues that we've talked about today. Hold a kickoff meeting to get everyone on the same page. During the project itself, if the client starts making noises or complaints, whether in meetings or on site, pick up the phone, speak to your lawyer or to the legal team of your trade association. Don't let things deteriorate. And finally, introduce processes and quality management systems that introduce best business practice, not just at pre-tender stage, but throughout the project life cycle to monitor the achievement of quality. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Nora, there for that last roundup. Was really good. And that's sparked a number of questions. So thank you and well done, Nora. So let's get into our Q&A session now. And I'm going to go to Walter first and foremost. Walter, you had a comment after your presentation from one of the participants saying, giving you some feedback about whether ISO 9001 should be revised or not. And their suggestion is it should not be revised as yet because the latest 2018 edition of the standard is still in the honeymoon period. In other words, enjoying its youth. And so if you revise the standard, the effects on other integrated standards may also need revising, otherwise it could be difficult to form an integration. Now, Walter, do you want to respond to that in the first instance?
I mentioned it in my talks before, that the most organizations migrated recently to the new standard, and the need to strengthen application of the requirements is noticed as there were considerable changes in the last edition. So, and there's a lot of effort if you change every, let's say, in a certain duration. If you change everything, then it's a very big effort for every organization to do it. So, and therefore, I would let's say, suggest to make minor adjustments, as I told before, and yeah, and we should take, let's say, in focus of us to get all the stakeholders in a project, including investment, government, and so on, I said, to put in our boat and to really and to develop and to make better projects with this parts of all of us. Yeah. This is what I can recommend.
Very good, thank you. And I want to now just go to Michael. Michael, you had a comment after your presentation saying that what Michael said is correct. So well done, Michael.
Thank you.
The project insurance premiums are too expensive, but clients do not usually accept the corporate insurance because the coverage may not be enough under their corporate insurance. And this is quite a big question, but it sort of throws open our discussion and links into everyone's discussion. Are there any systemic approaches to bring down the premium amount for project coverage that insurance companies could maybe agree with, such as assessment of capability of supervision or by the consultant with expertise in responsibility for detecting design errors or construction defects? So how do we minimize the likelihood of design errors or construction defects? What role does the consultant play in terms of supervision? Is that one way in which we can manage the risk?
How long have I got to answer this question?
No, it was a big question.
Yeah, exactly. I'll try and summarize it as best I can. I think you have to consider 5 areas. I think the first area we've already talked about, which was raised by Malcolm, the fact of doing some form of pre-loss survey risk assessment. I think that may become mandatory, that you will not be able to get project insurance unless you have that. The second point is, I think you're going to find that the base of what is insured under project insurance may have to change. For that, I mean any project which is not designed to a certain percentage may not qualify for project insurance. Another thing is the third area is that I believe the deductible self-insured retention, it needs to be inflated on an annual basis automatically. I don't think you can start a project for 5 years and then it goes on for longer, and to expect that inflation has stood still. So I think there needs to be an incremental amount of inflation built into the retention. The next thing is, I believe, delays in delivery of documents will not be insured by project insurance. I think basically the project insurance has to be brought back to design errors. The other thing is de-scoping and taking out contract administration. I think, again, underwriters will expect, and they will put conditions in the policy to insist that there is that supervision and the contract administration is maintained throughout the project. So really, yeah, a very good question, and it brings back into play, I think, all the things that have been mentioned in this seminar today. Webinar, sorry, I say, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And in fact, there were quite a lot of common questions or questions in common around the role of the contractor and this relationship between contractor and consultant, and how we look at that relationship and make it as collaborative as possible to manage risk.
Yeah, I think there was, just very quickly, there was one question there. What about the contractor's design risk? Yes, contractors can buy professional indemnity insurance in the same way as consultants can. So I'd head that one off very quickly if you needed to.
Right.
Me too. Okay.
Well done, thank you. And Martin, I'm sure you have thoughts on this one too, but interestingly, someone asked a very simple but interesting question. Whose fault is the design error in construction?
Well, it may start with incomplete briefing from the client, that the expectations of the client really didn't come through to the designer, so he designs the wrong thing. And this is why review is so important, or as in the ASCE guide, value engineering. So that would be an interdisciplinary team looking into the design and whether the functionality of the design, the intended functionality, could be achieved by other means. So this is not just putting together design and handing that over to the client. It is a collaborative effort. It is an interview kind of thing where you have the client in-house, and probably also not just the investor, but the definitive owner, the users, and to see this is what we designed. So, for example, we in hydropower, we also have electromechanical designs, and then you're talking about man-machine interfaces on the control panel and all that. So that we need to have strong buy-in of the client and his staff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Malcolm, from your perspective as well, from the loss adjustment point of view, do you see this tension occurring when it gets to that disputation space around when a contractor is making adjustments to design, and the tension that then that causes potentially if those design changes are not being picked up by the consultant?
Yes, and I think that's a very important feature, that if the contract and you've got a specification for something, if that's then not followed and there's not a correct audit trail through that with correct expert opinion as to that correction or that alteration is appropriate, then that's going to cause considerable problems, and it's certainly going to cause a problem. I said that we look at the root cause of any failure, and of course one of the reasons for doing that is because we want to see if there's a recovery, and if that change in specification has happened but it hasn't been signed off properly and there hasn't been a proper contractual amendment, perhaps, that's always going to lead to problems, without a doubt.
Yeah, and Nora, from your perspective, sitting in that seat that you have there, looking after the interests of the consultant, where do you see some of these tensions occurring?
I think it's about the lack of clarity in communication, the breakdown in communication, a lot of the times. And it's interesting when you talk about design errors, is when you start digging into it, are they actually errors, or is it a misconception between what the client thinks they want or thinks they've asked for and what the consultant thinks that the client has asked for? And the truth oftentimes lies somewhere in the middle, and it's trying to untangle that costs a lot of money and time for both sides. So for my part, it's really getting that clarity right from the start. And if, as consulting engineers, you have to make certain assumptions in terms of those designs, make sure that those assumptions are very clearly set out. And records and more records, because things do change during the actual project itself. Things might happen where verbal instructions are given, but if they're not captured somewhere, then it really doesn't help in the long term. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is quite interesting. Someone just popped into the chat there. Design errors happen due to multiple consultants working on potentially a design and not integrating across the final design. And also if the concept design and detailed design are not triangulated for verification and audit purposes, that can cause a problem. Now, this multiplicity approach is quite a challenge, isn't it? Is that something you're able to comment on there, Nora? That's that communication point again, really, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's just sort of various facets of this common problem, and the fact that it is such a complex process and there are so many parties involved. I think we could have a whole session just looking at this in particular, but I wonder whether Michael or Malcolm, you've seen this happen in real life. I can't talk about specific examples, but you might be able to share some of your experience.
Perhaps I'll give Malcolm some thinking time, because I've got quite an easy answer. The integrated design projects are very difficult, because if you're then talking about people sitting cheek by jowl next to each other, who made the mistake? And therefore whose insurance pays? What we have seen on projects which are truly integrated, we have seen that perhaps project insurance, it needs to be purchased by the integrated party. So in other words, perhaps a joint venture or an LLC, to take out the problems, we could say, of trying to discern fault. And also, I'm sure Malcolm will talk about the costs of trying to discern that fault between others. Is that, there you go, Malcolm, is that the hospital pass you wanted?
Yeah, that is the hospital path I want. I was actually going to say that from our perspective, and I think Nora's touched on this, very often what we find is everyone thought someone else was going to do something that nobody did, and we often find when we step back and we analyse the root cause of a problem. And from a lawyer's perspective, I think you step back, and it's almost like you can say, well, obviously with hindsight we should have done that, but I think that's where the lawyers really earn their keep, and they take that overarching view of it, and by dissecting that and that critical path of what went wrong, and understanding therefore who was liable for that. That's where it is that benefit of hindsight that you suddenly realize that, yeah, we all thought that's what the client wanted, but no one actually asked, or no one checked, or we thought that specification change was okay and it wouldn't have an impact, but you know what, no one checked. And so it's those sorts of things that contribute. So it often isn't just one single error, there'll be a number of errors, and that's where the lawyer's work gets really interesting to unpick that. But you've got, with the greatest respect, Nora, the opportunity in the cold light of day to do that and do a very good job of that. Whereas at the time, we're probably faced on the contract with time pressures, financial pressures, etc. So decisions are made, and then in retrospect, you think, shouldn't have done that. So yes, that's what I would say to that.
And one of the participants pointed out, one of the biggest challenges with respect to construction projects is developing a good quality management system and getting that commitment to quality right up front. Now, that presumably is a significant way in which we can manage some of this. So, Martin, how would you answer that question in terms of developing and really embedding quality management system into your project?
Well, a prerequisite possibly would be that most of the participants have an ISO certification in place, so that first of all we speak the same language. And then it is a relation between project management and quality management. Who has the upper hand? Are the project managers themselves sufficiently trained in quality aspects? Or should we also have some internal audits on project managers? And for example, in Bonn hydropower plant in the 1990s, when only very few contractors were certified and also few designers, we really, as a part of the contracts and as a part of the quality management system, overarching all contractors and us as general planning designer, we had audits done from the design office on the site with the contractors. We didn't manage to get rid of all problems. We overlooked one subcontractor who delivered tubings for the shaft. This one we overlooked, and they had a problem afterwards. But it's very important that you have a partnership where even contractors admit you coming to the site and audit them. If not, the insurer does it. I also know from large projects like the bridge between Denmark and Sweden, where it was part of the project insurance that the insurer and his civil engineers, which he had on his payroll, were allowed to audit the construction site. So it is about learning and feedback of experience.
Thank you. And that leads quite nicely into some of the questions that have been asked about qualifications. And there's a question about, are we doing enough to monitor the level of qualifications, including the use of individuals on contracts who are not qualified by a professional body, and the decertification of professionals who do not meet the standards of their professional body. This commentator said that as all members of professional bodies can control by refusing to work with parties who aren't qualified, or indeed going through bodies that can be controlled through their membership. So Walter, what do you feel about qualifications and the level of qualifications? We've still got Walter. Maybe on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
There we go. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this question. Qualification, yeah, is in every organization is it's a very complex process with this focus on qualification. When I come back to my presentation, I told you before, I just can repeat it. It seems there is a high degree of agreement that the adoption of long-term training in quality management and engineering skills should be adopted to achieve engineering design excellence. So this is, I think it's important to establish these realistic design durations of achieving quality improvement. And this is just in context with all the people are involved in a project. Qualification is, yeah, it's a very important point. It's a very important issue of all of our project work. And there's also, if I can mention, there also, just to talk about FIDIC now, the FIDIC credentialing is also one project which tried to, let's say, increase the level of all the members in the project. And if you are involved with such a certification project, not only in quality management, also in this credentialing of FIDIC, so it just can, yeah, can to a goal to a better work. So this have what we do have to achieve.
Thank you, Walter. And interestingly enough, someone's just popped in the chat as well about project managers and having an understanding of quality. Is this an issue? Do you see there's like a cohort of project managers who are perhaps a little junior, who really have that deeper level of experience to be able to really input quality into the process? Do you think that's an area of training that's needed for quality for project managers?
Yes, definitely. It's a great area, and this is what we really have to do. Just to come into education training, we have to build up the people. This is what it is. As I told you, also in the 90s, there was Donny Jensen from Denmark who told us that the people are the employees, are the lifeblood of the engineering consultancy of the companies. So that's what it is. It didn't change.
Sure. And Mark?
The problems we see is that the consulting fees, the engineering fees are so low nowadays that we have hardly a chance to train young project managers on the job, because the client wants to pay only for one project manager, not for two in 3 unions. And the second consequence is that those experienced project managers are overworked. The client wants to see the top project manager, the best engineer the consultant can offer. And so always the same people are working overtime and are exhausted. And then quality may suffer as well. So the thing is, how do we convince the clients to give young project managers a chance, provided they're properly supervised through a quality management system?
Now, Malcolm, I saw you nodding there as well. What would you like to add?
Yes, well, obviously, as someone who runs a professional body, I'm bound to say that this is extremely important, but it is. And I think it's not just the technical knowledge, but it's also the ethical standards, because if we're not careful, we run into the risk of just get it done. I don't care what you do, but get it done. And then things don't get asked about because I've just got it done. And then the response is, well, he's going to prison, not me, because I didn't say he could do that. So I think those ethical and knowledge standards are both simultaneously extremely important and valuable. And the things you're talking about in terms of the costs of training people is exactly what we have in loss adjusting, where there's always pressure on fees. So I made a note here. You've got to have a realistic budget for a project, and that should include the proper expertise. And you're absolutely right. Training for the future is absolutely vital. And we forget that, or don't deliver that at our peril, and then we wonder why we hit problems later. So that investment in the future, for me, it's incredibly important. We talk about, for example, a green, environmentally friendly world. How can we deliver that if we allow disasters to happen, or we have to rework things because we don't use the right technology and the right expertise to make sure that we get things right? So I think all those things as a collective are very valuable, but on a micro scale, if we're not careful, we omit that for cost benefit analysis at that point, but not thinking of the greater good.
Yeah, that's a great point. And ethics and how ethics interplays here is so important. And I think one of the participants picked up on that in the chat, so thank you. And Nora, how does this all then fit in with the liability management piece from your perspective, and how we upskill and ensure that we're continuing to meet those professional standards?
I think having really clear policies as to CPD, continuing training for staff is super important. Making sure we learn from lessons which have not been that great, actually, and making sure that as a firm that we are honest with ourselves and say, look, maybe things didn't go so well on this occasion. What are the takeaways from that? How can we not make the same mistake time and time again? To me, those are absolutely vital. Just really making sure that we do include everybody, right from the grads all throughout, because the grads today will be the project managers of tomorrow and the directors of tomorrow. And actually just making sure that they've got that basic training there on what to look for. Including them in a kickoff meeting to say, look, this is the project, this is what we need to do. Just making sure that there's clarity all around.
Fantastic, thank you. And just quickly, I think Martin mentioned it in your talk to us, but I also wanted to pick this up as well, because I think it's something we're keen to cover off, and that's how we use emerging technology to help with risk and liability management and to improve quality. So Martin, is this something you'd like to make a comment on about emerging tech and how we use it to best effect?
Well, there are several people around who hope that all our quality issues will disappear through BIM models and digitalization and throwing coordinates, geo-reference coordinates onto the construction site. But this entails new risks, because we must insist that the constructor has a plausibility check on our design in terms of what he's able to detect. And if we have transmission directly of digital data to the construction sites, and very often the contractor wouldn't notice whether his digging is on the right plot of land, for example. And so we always have to provide control information so that the constructor is able to help us detecting errors, which may have occurred on our side, but he should collaborate in helping to detect our errors. And so any automatization is dangerous in that respect. Also, what is worrisome in terms of education, are the black box design programs like final element technology and this kind of stuff. Because what I'm afraid of, that the principals of our consultancies, they're a little bit older, a little bit aged, and they say, you as a young graduate, you come straight from college and you are the best, you have the best knowledge of that design package. And then there's no control about any errors the young guy commits, because his senior is not able to check what he is doing, what the young guy is doing, because he hasn't experienced it during his own education, his own studies. So this is another emerging risk of this automatization going on. And what I'm really afraid of is that architects in building, they send us their BIM file, and then the final element model is generated automatically by the BIM file. And nobody understands why we need some more time for checking, because they think everything is auto-optimized. You just need to press a button and you have your statistical analysis. And that's not true, and that we have to convey.
Absolutely, it still needs to be the human check and balance. And Michael, do you see, just quickly, from an insurer's perspective or assurance perspective, do you think that this is going to help us see some of our insurance premiums come down, though, if we start to embrace tech? No, he's shaking his head, oh dear.
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not. Innovation, as Martin very eloquently said, brings its own challenges. You know, what it does, it resets. You then have to measure, well, was the negligence not in the digital technology, but was it in the fact of how you use that digital technology, how you didn't check it? And there is still that duty of care. It is not a panacea to take away. I think the people looking for this silver bullet to get premiums down. I will make one last mention. The insurance premiums went down over 15 years. In actual fact, the further you push them down, the more they will bounce up. And I think people have got used to over 15 years of insurance premiums going down. But in actual fact, that it needs to recalibrate to a new level. New technology, I don't think will do that. Innovation, as we saw, mentioned already today about Grenfell, it actually gave rise to more claims rather than less. P3 projects, we are seeing enormous amount of claims coming out of P3 projects when projects are getting to the end of their concession period, where claims are now coming out. So you know, innovation's great. We need innovation, but unfortunately, I don't think it will take away the professional indemnity claims that are coming through.
Oh, now I should have ended on a slightly lighter note question.
Sorry about that.
Right. Now I am being asked to go to our final poll, so we'll just move to that now. So a final poll for all of you participants. What will most enhance both project quality and the image of the consulting profession, in your opinion? So if you can select your top two. So is it going to be reduction of design flaws that are going to make the difference, partnering with contractors to improve scheduling and costs, improved risk management and allocation of risk, advising clients as early as possible on the whole of life of a project, so design, build, operate, maintain, or finally, learning from failures and knowledge management? What do you think the top two are going to be that's going to make the difference to the image and quality of our profession? Hopefully you're all answering away there. Okay, Barbara. Oh, yes, we have some results through. Oh, it's quite close, actually. So 53% of you said advising clients as early as possible on the whole of the life of the project. Next up was then improved risk management and allocation of risk, just a little bit behind on 46. Then we had learning from our failures and knowledge management, followed by reduction of design flaws, and then finally partnering with contractors to improve scheduling and costs. Very good, thank you very much for your opinions on that. That's going to be very helpful insights for our committee discussions. So my job now is to hand over to Nelson for the final word, please, Nelson, and to thank all our panelists today.
Nicola, thank you very much for a very, very well executed, webinar. At this point in time, we have Bill. Bill, I just wonder whether you've got one word or two to share with us before I summarize. Bill?
What an impossible task, Nelson, to put one word or two into such a lively and great discussion. You guys are absolutely terrific. I do have a couple of thoughts that I'll try to put into very few words. And I sound like a broken record, and hopefully most of you will agree with this. If you're entering into a big project with a very bad contract with unbalanced risk, you are in incredibly dangerous territory. Now, it'd be very simple to say don't do it, but we all need to survive, and we all know realistically how many times we say, okay, we're going to do this. But if you do, you better manage the risk tremendously. The other thing related to that is I know we as engineers and representing our consulting firms often try to educate our clients on the dangerous element of unbalanced risk and how it's really in nobody's interest. I would reach out to the insurance community as well to help us with that education process. The other thing that I would mention that we want to keep in the back of our mind is we all have pressure on engineering fees, but whenever we do, we should remind our clients that the fees they pay for engineering services are between 1 and 2% of the life cycle cost of what they're going to inherit. So it's somewhat illogical to squeeze fees too much. So fantastic discussion, folks. And now back to you, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Bill, for that. Thank you, Nicola. Let me just start by saying thank you to Nicola for chairing this particular gathering very, very well structured. Thank you very much, Nicola. Thank you to the panelists, each and every one of you, from Walter to Malcolm to Nicola, also to Nora and Michael. Thank you very much for your contribution. I went through the whole of the presentation, listening to what individuals have to say. From the idea of Walter talking about the ISO, I think my takeaway is that it's too early, even though it's yet to be in place, and we need to make sure that the baby is well settled before we start thinking about it. We understand the issue about the loss adjustment. I think the message that came through there was very loud and clear. Also, Michael talked about, we need to understand the state of the market. Market has gone down for 15 years, and the only way is up, which means we need to get our act together. But I also take the pick about the project insurance. One point I wasn't covering the project insurance is how do we make sure that at least when you do project insurance, your normal day-to-day activity, you are full covered that. Martin talked about the issue about design and residual risk. I like the model you put across. I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from that. More important to me was Nora's comment. I think, you pick up the issue about the, use standard form of contract wherever you can, because the risk is well known, well balanced. And there's a lot of school for thought about, the scope, the creep, the payment, and liability and the exposure and the quality management. So all of these are very good tools and things that we should be looking at. Can I use this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for your contribution to the meeting? I suspect if you ask me, Nicola, the big takeaway for me is there's a lot of lessons to be learned about this. Bill said about it, you don't actually compromise the quality of design just because you want the job. Learn to say no. If your client do not want to pay a proper fee for the job. This is a big takeaway for me. The other point I want to pick up here as well is also from Nora. She went through a whole list of things that you should be doing. And I think this is a good form of document we can use as a guide for the industry. I know you all have yours individual, manual in-house, but can we produce something as FIDIC document that can give small, medium, or large firm opportunity to use as a guide? Because a lot of the things that Nora talked about, I find that extremely useful. And I do remember in my early days as managing association, we used to talk about the joint and several liability. I'm glad that's no longer in, but Nora also talked about the issue about deep pocket. So be careful when you go out there. So on that note, I want to thank each and every one of you who is joining us on this meeting for participating in the gathering, for the question that came through, and for Nicola for mastering that particular process, and we cover it very well. So thank you very much. Wherever you are, be safe. God bless.